Hi, everyone. It's Matt Armstrong from The Pen Habit. Welcome back for another video. And today's pen is one of those that you see from across the room and it just calls out to you. I was at my local pen store, World Lux here in Seattle, and I was just there to buy ink. That's it. Just a bottle of Private Reserve Avocado, which, by the way, the ink ended up being bad and I had to end up throwing the whole bottle out. But I was on my way out the door, bag in hand with ink, and I just turned my head, and that was the end of it. It was that was when I met my my Conway Stewart Marlborough. So this is this was in the pre-owned pens cases, and this is another one of those Conway Stewarts. Now I like the Conway Stewart brand a lot. It's a British brand. I have one modern pen. Before this Marlborough, I had one modern pen, which is the Conway Stewart Wellington. Very similar, and I'll show you more in the close-up. I have a Conway Stewart 24 and a Conway Stewart 14, both from the 50s probably. And I like the brand. I like their nibs. I'm a big fan, and that is pretty much going to hold true on this pen as well. So let's go through the stats first. So length, it is 134 millimeters capped. Uncapped, and it's a screw top pen. It's you've got 126. And then if you post it, and it can be posted kind of, it's a ridiculously long, I mean, this is seriously, really, it's a ridiculously long 182 millimeters. Now, the barrel is 13 millimeters in diameter, and the section is about 9.5 millimeters where you would hold the pen. So, and then in terms of weight, we're looking at a total weight of 24 grams with the cap on, and a total weight of 14 without the cap on. And that is with the converter in place and with ink in the pen. And just for comparison, I have here the Conway Stewart Wellington, which was also which is my absolute all-time favorite pen in my collection. I love it to death. And it is 36 grams with the cap, and make sure it doesn't roll off the scale here. It looks like 20 grams without the cap. So the Wellington is a slightly larger, slightly heavier, slightly wider pen, and the Marlborough is just a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, and just a touch narrower. So I'll show you here on the close-up cam. Here's the Marlborough up here, and here's the Wellington. Now, both of these pens are made out of what Conway Stewart calls their Dartmoor finish. It's a very, very pretty acrylic. One of my favorites. It's very dark brown and black with little veins of white. It looks like rock quartz almost. It's just very, very pretty pen. And looks very, very luxe, which I love. You can see kind of a little bit of the differences here. So the Marlborough is a much straighter pen. It doesn't have any curves. Like there are little curves in the barrel here. There's like a small bulge here, and again in the cap. The bottom has a point, and the top is rounded on the Wellington. The Marlborough, on the other hand, has a very slightly rounded top, but the bottom is completely flat, so much so that you can actually stand the pen upright. On the bottom, it will stand upright. Both the barrel and the cap are completely cylindrical. There's no curve in either at all. Around the top here, there's a small little grooves are carved all the way around the pen. It looks like kind of like a nut that you could twist off. As I mentioned earlier, it is a twist top pen. The threads are very, very well machined. Standard clip for Conway Stewart. It's very, very tight on this pen. Has the nice CS intertwined logo right there, and then kind of the diamond-shaped ball on the clip. And one of the things that makes this pen different is there are two bands here in the section of the barrel. This middle band here has a CS and a bunch of different hallmarks that under magnification basically show that this is sterling silver. That's what those hallmarks mean, essentially. And then the Conway Stewart barrel says, or it says Conway Stewart. It's engraved there. Marlborough number 32 of 50S, made in England. So this is another limited edition finish, the Dartmoor finish, but the Marlborough is available in a whole bunch of different finishes as well. If we go and look at the nib, we've got basically your standard Conway Stewart nib here. It is 18 karat gold, and this is a fine point nib. And then the CS logo and the diamond is yellow gold, and the rest is plated in some silver metal. I didn't do the research ahead of time to determine what that metal was. So in general, let's talk about the pen. If you like Conway Stewart pens, this is not going to be a huge differentiation for you. Before we do that, I did want to point out, I've had a couple people ask me, can you show the detail of the feed? Here is the detail of the feed. I'll also do a photograph. And then I wanted to just go, show you the filling system here. This pen does have a twist mechanism in place, so you can twist the cartridge in place, which I like a lot, or the converter in place rather, which I like a lot. So it does appear that the converter on the inside has leaked a little bit, so I need to figure out if my converter's gone bad. In any case, the pen is, as I mentioned, if you're used to a Wellington, this is going to be a little bit lighter. And frankly, it also doesn't feel quite as well made. Now, I love my Conway Stewarts, and this is a well-made pen, but there are just a couple things that irk me a little tiny bit. The first one is this step up right here between the threads and the section. The threads feel awkward there, and it's not a smooth transition between them. So depending on where you hold your pen, it could bother you. It doesn't really bother me, but it's one of those things where if I'm being super nitpicky, that's one thing that sticks out to me. But other than that, and it is a little bit lighter than I generally like. I would like to be able to post the pen because I think that extra heft would make this pen a lot more comfortable for me to use. The problem is when you post the pen, and I'll see if you can see this, it only goes on just a couple of millimeters. It's not on terribly securely. Frankly, I don't believe this pen was made to be posted. It's so long, it does get back heavy with the cap on. The balance is very nice though, and you don't need it posted. It fits very comfortably in the hand without posting. Now, I will go ahead and do a writing sample here in just a second. But the one thing I did want to mention is, as I said, this was a pre-owned pen. So I don't necessarily want you to take my words about this particular nib into a whole bunch of account when you go buy the pen, because I have no idea what what history of this pen was, how the previous owners treated it, and it was very scratchy. Only in one direction. It was very draggy. It would get kind of caught in the paper, and I've done a little bit of work on it to smooth it out, which it has worked out well. It's still, every now and again, I'll still get a little bit of drag, but and it's a fine nib, and fine nibs generally tend to have a bit more feedback than my preferred medium nibs. But I will say that I have, I mentioned earlier, 3 other Conway Stewarts, and I enjoy the nibs on all 3 of them. In fact, the nib on my Wellington, which I did a video of earlier, was an italic fine, or is an italic fine nib. And it is my favorite nib in my collection. I adore it to death. Well, not to death, but I really do like it. It's a great, great nib. Now, I did have to have that worked on as well because it had some starting problems. And this one I bought brand new. So just be aware that with Conway Stewart nibs, sometimes they do tend to over-polish them a little bit. In the case of this one, I don't know why it was returned to the store or why the store had it in the pre-owned case. But once I did a little bit of work to adjust the nib, it's a nice writing experience. So, okay, let's go over and do a writing sample then. All right, so as mentioned, this pen is the Conway Stewart Marlborough and the nib is fine. It is 18 karat, or if you're in the UK or most other places in the world, 18 karat. And the ink is Iroshizuku Kujaku. I have a lot of ink in my collection. I think I'm sitting at 70 some odd bottles right now. And I kind of gave myself an ultimatum that I was going to have one pen always inked with a single ink. Well, let me rephrase that. I was always going to have at least one pen inked with a single ink all year long until I finished up the bottle. And the ink I chose was Iroshizuku Kujaku. It's one of my top 3 Iroshizuku inks. I adore this ink. So chances are you're probably going to see it in a lot of video reviews because I'm going to be using it a lot. I want to actually finish a bottle of ink just to see what it's like, just to have that experience. And I told myself I'm not allowed to buy any more ink until I finished that bottle of Kujaku. So I'm about halfway done. Hopefully I'll get it wrapped up here within the rest of the year. So if you're a pen pal of mine, chances are at some point or another, you're going to get a letter written in Kujaku. All right, back to the sample here. Here's our little quote. All right, art is making something out of nothing and selling it. A rather cynical, but not entirely untrue quote from Mr. Frank Zappa. Okay, so in terms of writing, as I mentioned, this does give me a little bit more feedback than I generally prefer in a pen, but the pen is so comfortable to hold, I really don't mind it. And I will say, of all of the Conway Stewart pens I've owned, regardless of what ink I've put in them, I have never, ever had an ink flow problem. I may have had a hard start problem, but the ink has always flown perfectly in these pens. And to me, the hard starts and the skips and the scratchiness, that stuff I'm very comfortable repairing on my own. In terms of ink flow, I tend to be a little bit more wary about doing that because I've not had a lot of luck doing it. I need to take some more nib adjustment classes and watch the masters and how they adjust ink flow a little bit more. I really am not a huge fan of the method that I've seen other people do where they hold their finger over the tip of the nib. And even I've talked about this before, but they've talked tip of the nib and put pressure on it and to open up the tines a little bit more. I've had bad luck with doing that. As I mentioned in my last video, it just ends up ruining the nib in a lot of cases and springing the nib or causing too much space between the feed and the nib. And I'm just not a fan of that method. So anyway, back to this. The other thing that I find pretty consistent with all the Conway Stewart nibs that I've used is it actually can put out a pretty substantial amount of line variation. These are 18 karat gold nibs, and all of the nibs are quite springy. They're not flex nibs, but they are quite springy. And you can see here, there's just no pressure, more pressure, more pressure, more pressure. So I'm getting a pretty decent line variation if I put pressure down. Now, if I don't, then it just writes with a nice, very fine line. It's smooth. It works well. The ink flow is never a problem. I've never had the feed unable to keep up with my writing on these Conway Stewart pens, and the Marlborough is no different. It's a nice pen. And then we do a little bit of upside down writing. This is actually quite a smooth upside down nib, and writes with an extra fine line there. So all in all, I gotta say, this is another one where I'm glad I happened to pass it as I was walking out the door because this is a nice pen. I love the finish. I like the shape. It's very comfortable in the hand. The nib writes well. I like the springiness. I love the ink flow. Um, I like the pen a lot. Now, if I had to pick between the Marlborough and the Wellington, I'm still going to pick the Wellington because the Wellington is heavier, and I do like a slightly heavier pen. But man, and I love the Italic Fine Nib that Mike Masayama worked on this pen. So all in all, though, this Marlborough is a beauty. It's a beauty. I like it a lot. This is now fourth Conway Stewart pen in my collection, and I have yet to find one I haven't liked. So they're very quickly becoming pretty much my favorite pen brand. I'm pretty excited about it. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Got more stuff coming up in the next little while. Reminder, please go over to penhabit.com and check out any giveaways that we're doing, that sort of thing. And we'll have more pen videos and paper reviews coming up for you shortly. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you here next time on The Pen Habit. Bye.